To unpack the latest GDP numbers, I'm now joined by Professor Waldo Krugell, economist at the Northwest University. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. Now, 0.4% doesn't sound like a great number, but are we to say, well, given that we are coming from 0.0 growth in the previous quarter, Biji Magbaya?
Thank you, Buyo. I think that's an excellent summary. It's very low, but it's better than having zero again. And there was a time when we were a bit worried that we might actually see a contraction again and that the economy would fall into a technical recession. I think in that aspect, the 0.4 is very welcome.
Electricity, a significant contributor to this, we are told.
That's right. And I think we expected a bounce from the absence of load shedding that would contribute to more production activity. And it's clear that there was some, but even more would have been nice. I think manufacturing specifically, we thought there would be even a greater jump in output. And then, of course, within the measurement of the electricity sector in itself, the absence of load shedding contributes to growth in output and value add.
Does it feel like there is a deliberateness, in other words, behind these numbers, or is it something that just happened? Are we able to tell that?
It's difficult to tell. I think we need to cast our minds back to the second quarter when there was still significant political uncertainty ahead of the election. And in that sense, it dampened economic growth at a time when consumers have been knocked flat now for basically 2 years with high inflation rate and high interest rates. So given that, the 0.4 is not bad. And if these numbers lag the feeling that's currently out there in the economy. Since then, there's been a lot more optimism, and we've seen it in the markets. The JSE is doing much better, and the rand-dollar exchange rate is much stronger. But it hasn't translated into real economic activity and numbers that are currently being published. So it's a bit backward looking, and hopefully we'll see better numbers coming up in the next month or so.
Let's speak a bit about that political uncertainty you were talking about ahead of the election, because I've also heard a few other economists making the same point. What are we judging the GNU on, though? Because, I mean, they've hardly sort of put anything on the table beyond an intention to come together and make sure that they work towards, the same goals, making the country a better one, growing the economy, making sure education works, we fight crime, and so on and so forth. But we haven't really seen in very real and practical terms a lot of that. So is the hope on, are we pinning this on our hopes that because these people have decided to come together, hopefully they will be able to, come up with something different than we've seen up until now, especially in latter years?
I think that's a big part of it. There's a different team on the field, and we expect more or something different from this new group of players. So I think that's part of it. And I think in addition to that, some of the appointments have helped to bolster that confidence. So we still have Minister Gorongwana at Finance, and he's been doing a good job, and he's been given the opportunity to continue with fiscal consolidation, for example. So I think there are moves in that direction, but optimism can only take us that far. Sooner or later, we'll be looking for some real progress. And I think that's going to be tricky for the GNU to deliver. But there are places where we're already seeing a bit of progress in the way that Transnet is thinking and operating. We've got the mini budget coming up at the end of October, early November. That'll give us some signs as to where this process of fiscal consolidation is going and what the Minister of Finance's plans are. So there'll be some markers in the road coming up. And I think it's closely watched by ratings agencies, investors, everyone who's involved, to see that we're moving in a different direction.
I mean, those rating agencies look at what we look at what we do or don't do, and then they decide to give us ratings, and then they move on. But isn't a lot dependent on what we all together collectively put in? And I'm taking you to maybe a few steps back. I wanted to cast your mind back to even before elections. In fact, even before the State of the Nation address ahead of the election. You'll recall that for the longest time, or in fact last year, the president promised a social compact. And a lot of emphasis was placed on this called social compact because built into it was what each one, of the sort of broad components at NEDLEC, for example, whether you're talking about the business constituents, whether you're talking about government, whether you're talking about civil society, or whether you're talking about labor, we're going to sit and discuss what it is that needs to be done to take the country forward. And within that conversation were conversations about what each one of them would be prepared to sacrifice to, make the country work to the benefit of everybody. As you know, that sort of never happened. So one then becomes skeptical every time we talk about, for instance, when the president was addressing business only a week or 2 weeks ago, saying, no, we are all prepared to work together and we are going to work together. But you're saying, but you haven't met the deadlines that you set for yourselves to do what you said was probably the most important work that needed to be done in order to grow the economy.
I think you're right, and if you, when they are prepared to work together, it's in the format of these working groups. It's in having multiple meetings. It's in sharing information. That sort of working together. But they haven't agreed on the trade-offs. If you want to promote whatever, say localization, it comes at the cost of higher tariffs. If you want to have a more labor-intensive production. It could come at the cost of protecting labor or the minimum wage, or with all of these big debates, if you want the one thing, you have to trade off against something else. And those differences have been papered over now for too many years. And I think once it gets to a specific point where a decision needs to be made, they just pop up back again. And there's this lack of trust and lack of social capital that's really been hampering the grand process of reform. The smaller reforms are easier to sort out, the administrative ones, but those fundamental ideological ones are much more tricky, simply because the different parties have not agreed to those sacrifices.
Exactly, and then you see that ever so often whenever there's an issue on the table. Take, for example, the compact that was supposed to be signed a couple of weeks ago. Then business came out and said, we're not signing this because there's a lot of talk about the NHI, and then this was postponed by a week, and then some groups, of course, decided not to sign. And then again, you could see that the cracks were being papered over. And one wonders, for how long is this going to continue? Because you can't have a situation where every time there's an issue and then one person sulks and then there's no movement on that particular issue. And mind you, we're not even talking about those trade-offs we're not talking, about the things that people will have to sacrifice in order for the country to move forward. So until what needs to happen to like really deal with these issues?
In a way, I think many analysts have argued that we need a big crisis to really force those decisions. But we've sidestepped that big crisis, and now we're all together in the GNU. and again, it sort of kicks the can down the road. I think we're more likely to see sort of technocratic solutions. And the work that Operation Vulindela is doing, those sorts of things, we'll see some progress with. But these bigger shifts in how do we think about the economy and everybody's place in it, those battles are going to be fought in a much longer run and probably through another election.
Stop kicking the can down the road. Dr. Krugell, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it.